everyone, and welcome to the UX Academy podcast, a Studio 89 initiative to connect the academic and practice worlds of experience design. I am your host, Abdullah Ali, and it is my pleasure to have you listen to the first episode of the podcast. I am a creative scientist, and my education has largely focused on studying, designing, and building human-centered technologies. A little bit of my educational background is I have a bachelor's degree in information systems and web design, a master's degree in human-centered design from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and I have a master's degree in information science and a PhD in human-computer interaction from the University of Washington. I am a National Science Foundation Fellow, and I have worked at Carnegie Mellon University, Microsoft Research, and Apple before. At the moment, I am a part of Amazon's AWS professional services team, where I work as a design and innovation consultant for businesses building innovations on the AWS cloud. In my work, I advocate for the people who will be using and impacted by the technologies my clients and I are building and putting out into the world. All right, so how did I get into design? I've always been creative, and I never really considered myself a designer. I didn't even know what designers do per se, or how to become one, and the different kinds of design there are. But I've always liked making things, and I always liked solving problems, and that's sort of what design is. It's solving problems. When I was in my senior year of college, I needed some electives, and it was one of those I sometimes leave things to the last second, and it was one of those times that I needed a class, an elective, and I hadn't signed up for anything, and the only class that had an opening was Introduction to Human-Computer Interaction, that's taught by Dr. Amy Hurst, who's just an amazing accessibility researcher. She's at NYU right now, and I consider her a mentor and a friend of mine. And so I took Intro to Human-Computer Interaction, or HCI design. And on the first day of class, I remember Amy asking us, "Why are you taking this class? Write your answer." And a few years later, Amy showed me my answer, and I had written, "I want to build an Iron Man suit." Which is funny because that's the title of this episode and the title of the paper that I'm going to be talking about later in the episode, the research paper I just published. But suffice it to say, I didn't build any Iron Man suits in Intro to HCI, but however, I did find a career, mostly because of Amy. She was running a research lab, and she had a number of PhD and master students, and that was something that I had never thought about. Going to grad school, it was not in the cards for me. I thought my GPA was too low. I want to get out there and start making money and just design websites and start a software company or something like that. But Amy kept telling us to come and visit her lab. She's always looking for talented people to help her with her research. And I thought research at that point meant reading a whole bunch of things and distilling what you learned. That's what research to me is. And I was like, well, that's boring. I'm not interested in that. One day I was walking past the Pad Lab store, and they had this LED sign, and I was like, ooh, shiny things. Let me just walk in and see what's going on. And that was the day they had received a shipment of orders. They had recently gotten a grant funded, so they went out and bought a whole bunch of equipments to do research with. And when I say equipment to do research with, I mean 3D printers, drones, GoPros, and so on. So I walked in, and there was this really diverse group of people sitting down, unboxing all these cool technologies, and I was like, oh my God, these are my people. I found my people, So I walked in, sat down to their, status meeting. It was like a sprint meeting where, what were you working on last week? What are you working on next week? And what are you blocked on? And these people were talking about things like, oh, I'm researching how blind individuals can navigate the world around them using this app I'm developing. Other people are talking about using the wheelchair as an input method to control their devices around them. And I was just in awe of the level of creativity that was around in that environment, in that university lab. So I stuck around and I kept showing up until they gave me something to do. I started helping out on a research project, and we ended up writing a CHI paper. CHI is the Conference on Human Computer Interaction, and that paper won a Best Paper award. So that was like my first paper that I ever written or actually co wrote. And sort of the research bug hit me, and I stayed there. And, 7 years later, for degrees, I'm starting this podcast hoping that someone out there is going to listen and then they find their passion for science and technology the same way I found mine. So, on to my latest project that I just recently published, the Iron Man paper. The paper is titled I Am Iron Man Priming Enhances the Learnability and Memorability of User Elicited Gestures. So, what does that really mean? In my work, I studied how people interact with technologies. More specifically, I studied how they want to interact with technologies. So instead of us as designers and technology creators dictating how people should be interacting with technologies, I went out and asked how people want to interact with these technologies. So, what icon should we use to signify the save function? Instead of a floppy disk that nobody uses, let alone nobody even recognizes, especially younger users. And that's a different project that I have, and hopefully I'll make an episode about that too. So I studied how people want to interact with these technologies that we're making, especially new emerging ones like augmented reality and virtual reality, because these are new forms that have new sensing capabilities, and we don't know how we should design them and how things should map between input and function. Um, so that's sort of the realm of research that I operate in. And I had this idea about what if people watched some sci fi films with these weird technologies in them, like Iron Man, or another really famous one is Minority Report, Black Mirror, and things like that. What if we had people watch these clips from these science fiction and pop culture TV shows and movies? Would that have an impact on the proposals, on the designs that they would come up with to interact with some new form of technology we're designing? And if so, is that impact is going to be towards the better or worse? So that was essentially the motivation behind this latest project. So what I did, I went out and I recruited about 160 different people, and conducted this online because that's my research. My research is distributed interaction design, so I run all of my studies in an online fashion. And also, it was COVID, so getting people to come to a university lab would have been impossible, and I couldn't have done this project. And I put my participants in three different categories. One is the control category, meaning they weren't primed with anything, they weren't shown anything before starting their proposal journey and starting to give us ideas of what gestures they would like to use when interacting with the interface that we were designing. One was the sci-fi priming, where we showed people a montage of science fiction clips, and the other one was sort of a sanity check, where we borrowed a technique from psychology literature, where we asked people to recall 3 times when they were creative. There is psychology literature behind that, that if people do recall times when they were creative, that puts them in a more creative mindset, and it actually reduces stereotypical thinking. So we did these three different conditions, and we put together a list of prompts for an augmented reality video player. So we asked people, say, if you are interacting with this augmented reality device and you want to play a video, or you want to skip to the next video, or pin this video to a certain surface in your environment or something like that, how would you go about doing that? And from from the three different groups that we had, we ended up with three different gesture sets. So we were asking them, what gesture would you do in your hands, in free form in the air, to make the device, play a video, go to the next video, pause, what have you. And then we took these three sets of gestures, one that came out of the control group, one that came out of from the sci-fi priming group, and one from the creative mindset group. And then we tested them. We tested the how easily are these identifiable with a new, completely new group of people, with like 60 online people, and that we didn't see many differences between the groups. And then we tested the learnability and memorability of these gestures. So what we did is we again recruited people online, and then I had to be on a video call with them, because the learnability portion of the study had to be supervised, where I would show a participant a list of videos that came from one of the groups of gestures, and I show them all these gestures and be like, okay, once you see them once, attempt to perform them, and then I would note whether or not they did those gestures correctly. And if they didn't do them correctly, I would have them watch those videos again, and they kept doing those until they learned all 10 gestures. And then we calculated how easily it is to learn each gesture set that came out from the three different groups. Again, the controlled, sci-fi, and creative mindset. Then after a week, we invited those same, I think we had 18 participants. We invited them back and said, do you remember the gesture for play? Do you remember the gesture for pause? Do you remember the gesture for pin this video to the surface? And they didn't have access to the gestures or any way to remember them throughout that week. And we measured how well these gestures were remembered, and then we compared them across the different groups to see if the primed groups did any better. And turns out, yeah, they did. So in the end, we found that priming, or having somebody do a creative activity, whether it being remembering a time they were creative, being in a creative mindset, or watching a clip of science fiction movies, leads to creating and leads to proposing and then creating gestures that are more easily remembered and easily learned as well. So that was the entire project, and I will link to the full paper for the results if you're into reading 10 pages of dry scientific writing and looking at graphs and things like that. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the UX Academy. You can find me online anywhere at the Axe Ali on Twitter, on Instagram, and my website is axeali.me. You can also find me on Instagram at the studio89.design, also on TikTok and online.